Rocky Mountain Construction is an American roller coaster manufacturer based in Hayden, Idaho. They started work in the amusement industry in 2001, but didn't build their first roller coaster until 2011. But since then, they have exploded in popularity due to their innovation in transforming rough wooden roller coasters into smooth hybrid coasters with crazier elements. They've also been able to construct these rides from the ground up in recent years, and they offer a handful of other ride models as well. These include the Topper Track model, which is their wood coaster design, and the Raptor Track model, which is a single rail roller coaster. RMC currently has 23 roller coasters in operation, with another 2 set to open this year in the United States. I have ridden 20 of them, with plans to ride a few new ones this upcoming season. Now, I'm a roller coaster enthusiast who travels a lot. I always seem to have a trip planned that includes at least one new RMC roller coaster. So with that in mind, you may be wondering why I don't wait to make this video after I've ridden them all. Well, there's 3 reasons. First of all, there will always be new RMCs opening around the world, so by the time I think I'd be ready to make this list, there could be another reason for me to delay the video. 2, I've already held up this list for a while now, partially for that first reason that I wanted to ride them all. But this has probably been one of my most popular video requests for over a year now. The last reason is there's an RMC in Japan. Look, I'd love to visit Japan as much as the next guy, but realistically, it could be several years before I have the capacity to do that. Before we get started, allow me to honorably mention the RMCs I have not ridden, including those under construction. Air Force 1 at Fun Spot America Atlanta, Goliath at Six Flags Great America, Hakuge at Nagashima Spa Land, Wildcat's Revenge at Hershey Park, and Wildfire at Colmartin. Number 20, New Texas Giant at Six Flags Over Texas. Starting off this list is my lowest ranked RMC coaster, New Texas Giant. This was the original one, opening in 2011, and with that in mind, it's a great ride. A lot of the best roller coaster manufacturers of today had rough starts with their early rides. RMC did not. I must preface that every RMC I've ridden has been an excellent coaster. New Texas Giant being at the bottom of this list isn't me saying I didn't enjoy it. At the time of its opening, people were taken back by the airtime it provides. These days, it's not as unique given that the sensations and elements have been replicated and improved upon. New Texas Giant's biggest flaw is its weak second half. From the mid-course brake run all the way until the end, none of the airtime hills besides the final few at the end are all too good. The ride does have an exceptional first drop and some great overbank turns and airtime moments in the first half though. Number 19, Jersey Devil Coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure. The way I had heard coaster enthusiasts talk about Jersey Devil led me to believe it would be far and away my least favorite RMC. But when I rode it for the first time last spring, I was thoroughly impressed. I can see why it wouldn't be everyone's favorite, as the drawn-out elements lack intensity compared to other RMC rides. But it does have a great variety of forces, including airtime, positive Gs, and hang time. A common complaint amongst enthusiasts is that the second half isn't very memorable, and I can understand that. Sometimes the mid-course brake run will trim vehicles and sap the ride of its speed towards the end. When I rode it in April 2022, it flew straight through the brakes, making the last few airtime hills good fun. Altogether, I think Jersey Devil is a very fun and often underrated coaster. Number 18, Wonder Woman Flight of Courage at Six Flags Magic Mountain. I should have stated earlier that all of RMC's non-Raptor coasters have original layouts, but Wonder Woman does happen to be a near clone of Jersey Devil coaster. The only differences are an added foot of height to take the single rail height record and a few additional turns at the end. But it's also run slightly different, as I've never seen the mid-course brake run actually slow riders. This might have to do with the fact that there's more track to clear in the second half compared to Jersey Devil, but whatever the reason, it causes the elements there to pop more. Aside from that, the first half feels almost identical to Jersey Devil. Sometimes people will ask me which I prefer, Wonder Woman or Jersey Devil, to which I respond Wonder Woman, but it really honestly doesn't matter. There's hardly a difference between the two rides, so don't fall for anyone ranking these far apart in their rankings. Number 17, Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia. You know RMC is good when this is towards the very bottom of the list. Twisted Cyclone is the shortest of the hybrid coasters, and that's honestly my biggest complaint with it. It packs in some great elements, with my favorite being the wave turn where riders experience multiple seconds of sideways airtime. It's also got some other great airtime moments and 3 inversions, including the one-of-a-kind reverse cobra roll. I will say I've heard people rave about Twisted Cyclone because of the way it runs compared to other RMCs. During my visit to Six Flags Over Georgia, it was an 80-degree day with a few rain showers sprinkled in, which should in theory be peak conditions for this ride. And while it did run quite well from what I could tell, it wasn't any more powerful than the average RMC in my opinion. Still a great ride overall. Number 16, Joker at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. I think this is the most underrated RMC of them all. Most people would put this in last place, but as you can see, I have it above quite a few others. Similar to Twisted Cyclone, Joker is one of the smaller hybrid coasters at just 100 feet tall, but it's also 800 feet longer, and that extra length is what pushed it over the edge for me. As with all the other RMCs, you can expect some great ejector airtime from this ride, but one of the other things I really enjoyed about Joker was its inversions. As I've ridden all these RMCs, the inversions have started to become less and less memorable for me, as they're all pretty much the same same or if not very similar. Joker's first element after the first drop is a step-up underflip, which is currently only found on this RMC but will also be introduced to Wildcat's Revenge at Hershey Park later this year. This leads directly into a 0G roll, which is also fantastic, and I think having inversions instead of airtime come directly after the first drop was a different but effective approach. I really like how this ride blends its airtime and inversions to make one complete ride experience. Number 15, Storm Chaser at Kentucky Kingdom. This might be the first truly unpopular opinion of the list so far. Many will swear by Storm Chaser being a top 10 RMC, maybe even higher. I hear the same arguments that I do with Twisted Cyclone, that it just runs faster than most of the others. Now, I didn't ride Storm Chaser in as great of conditions as I did for Twisted Cyclone, but I could still tell it wasn't running slow by any means. Some have responded to my opinion by saying Storm Chaser is temperamental and runs much faster depending on the year. Where 2022 falls into that equation, I don't know, but I did ride this coaster on the park's last operating day of the season, so I'm basing its position off of how it was running most recently. Another similarity to Twisted Cyclone is that it's also a fairly short ride, just 300 longer than the aforementioned coaster. Storm Chaser does have some excellent airtime moments, but it otherwise felt unoriginal, and it's probably the least unique RMC I've been on so far, aside from the clones of course. Number 14, Medusa Steel Coaster at Six Flags Mexico. One of the most elusive RMC coasters located in Mexico City is a really fun ride. It was one of the earliest conversions, opening in 2014, and it's got a fantastic layout. The sequencing of the elements is some of the best because there's almost a pattern to it with the low to the ground turns and slow inversions. If there is a downside to this ride, it is without question one of the least intense RMCs, and the airtime is fairly mild. But I don't believe airtime was the focus of this ride because everything else felt like more of a highlight to me. Even though it isn't the most intense, Medusa has remarkable pacing, partly due to the fact that it follows the terrain and has that symmetry in the layout that I mentioned earlier. This is an awesome ride and arguably the best roller coaster in the country of Mexico. Number 13, Stunt Pilot at Silverwood. Speaking of elusive RMCs, this is the one that I'm guessing the least of you have ridden of the ones in America. Silverwood is a park located in North Idaho, right outside of Coeur d'Alene. The park made headlines in 2021 for adding their first big new roller coaster since 2008. Stunt Pilot is a slightly modified version of RMC's original Raptor track coaster, which we'll get to the first two in a second, but Stunt Pilot absolutely deserves its own spotlight. I think a lot of people were under the impression that this coaster would be much less intense than the original Raptors, especially after seeing the testing footage. But no, as time has passed, this thing has broken itself in and is now flying through the layout basically just as fast. It's true that some of the new profiling has made elements like the dive loop less exciting, but it's also made elements like the twisted airtime hill somehow even better. They did what they had to do to facilitate the longer train design that was introduced to Stunt Pilot, and I have no complaints. This is now the best roller coaster in the Pacific Northwest. Number 12, Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. Not to be confused with Wonder Woman Flight of Courage at Six Flags Magic Mountain, Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster was RMC's original Raptor coaster when it opened in May 2018. It caught a lot of enthusiasts' attention because of its cartoonishly fast pacing through the layout. Since this was the prototype Raptor, there are some things that the modified Stunt Pilot improved upon, including smoother track work, more forgiving restraints, and depending on who you ask, a less intense ride can be considered a good thing. Especially when Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster is widely considered to be one of the most intense and fast-paced coasters on the planet. I'm really not a fan of the vest restraints the ride has, but I otherwise prefer the raw power of the original over Stunt Pilot. Number 11, Railblazer at California's Great America. Opening just a month after Golden Lasso Coaster, Railblazer was the second Raptor to open around the world. This one feels almost identical to Wonder Woman, other than that it felt a little bit smoother. It's got the same ridiculous pacing, amazing ejector airtime, gray-out inducing turns, and it provides no time for riders to catch their breath. I understand that this may not be everyone's sort of thing, but I love it. If I did have one complaint to all three of the prototype Raptor layout, aka Wonder Woman, Railblazer, and Stunt Pilot, they are all pretty dang short. Considerably shorter than even Twisted Cyclone or Storm Chaser. But on these rides, every element from start to finish is a banger, which explains why they ranked as high as they did. Number 10, Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City. This was the first RMC topper track coaster I rode, and in some ways it's still the only one, but I'll get to that a bit later. Outlaw Run's wooden track has a texture to it that makes the ride feel more unhinged and crazy. I wish we got to experience this feel on more RMC coasters, but unfortunately after 4 topper track coasters had been built, it was realized that the model was pretty much obsolete with the success of the hybrid coaster, especially because hybrid coasters were now being built from the ground up instead of just for conversions. Outlaw Run's raw characteristics make it one of the best night rides I've experienced. Its setting, flying through the woods utilizing the terrain, is absolutely brilliant. I do have a few gripes with this ride though. The first is that I didn't find the airtime to be as strong as many of the newer RMCs. The second is that it's another one on the shorter side at just 2,900 feet long. It's only a couple hundred feet longer than Twisted Cyclone and Storm Chaser, and you can feel that. Lastly, the ending that everyone likes to talk about is a hang time centric moment. If you've watched my videos, you know I'm not the biggest fan of hang time, especially when you're going so slow that your entire weight is being held up by a restraint. But I know that revolves more around my own personal preferences, and that it does deserve some points for its uniqueness. Number 9, Twisted Colossus at Six Flags Magic Mountain. The RMC I've ridden the most amount of times is also also a really good one. And not just good, it's also very unique. Twisted Colossus is the only dueling coaster that RMC has ever built, and since it uses a Mobius loop system, riders experience both sides of the layout in one ride experience. Both the blue and green tracks have some noticeable differences, especially when it comes to the inversions, which are by far some of my favorites on any RMC. The green track has the famous Top Gun stall element where you hang upside down over another train whizzing by. The blue track has what appears to be a standard RMC 0G roll, but this one is so much whippier than the others, and once again, you have that train interaction with the other side. If there is a downside, the coaster was designed to duel only when the operations are fast enough. If this were under any other park chain, this wouldn't be much of a problem, but since it's Six Flags, who are notorious for their slow operations, it can be hit or miss. Either way, the layout is terrific, but when you get that perfect duel on both sides, it is among the best experiences you can get on any coaster in the world. Number 8, Wicked Cyclone at Six Flags New England. This is one of the more polarizing RMCs because some people love it and others think it's overrated. The people that think it's overrated claim it goes too slow at the end of the ride and that the coaster has pacing issues, but from all the times I've ridden Wicked Cyclone, it's been running fantastic. Even if it does get a little slower at the end, you are still getting airtime and it is great. I think it's more than worth it anyway since the ride is so much longer than a lot of other RMCs. I love how wonky some of the profiling is on this ride, especially when you get airtime on those outward banked hills. All the while, it's a glossy smooth ride experience like with most of the other RMCs. Another strength of this ride is how it weaves in and out of the ride structure, which is a feature only a handful of RMCs utilize to their fullest potential. I've always walked off this thing impressed, and I think it's one of the more underrated RMCs out there. Number 7, Lightning Rod at Dollywood. Many people's absolute favorite RMC is, in my opinion, the most overrated one there is. Now, Lightning Rod being 7 on this list should tell you that I still think it's a fantastic ride. It originally opened in 2016 as the world's first launched wooden roller coaster. At the time, the ride was receiving rave reviews from parkgoers, that is, if you could catch it running. Lightning Rod was closed more than it was open for its first few seasons. Many modifications have been made since then, including 2 notable changes that hurt the ride experience significantly. One, they've slowed the launch down enough to negatively affect the entire first half of the ride. I'm going to use the same comparison I did in my video talking about the most overrated coasters I've ridden. Look at how slow it goes after that launch compared to when it first opened. 2, they completely retracked Lightning Rod from a topper track coaster to a hybrid coaster. This took away the ride's wooden coaster feel that I love so much on rides like Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City. But as you could see, even with all these drawbacks, Lightning Rod still ranks quite high, and that's because it has one of the greatest layouts of all time. The way the coaster takes advantage of its terrain allows it to maintain a pretty good pace throughout the layout, especially once you get towards the end of the ride and are flying through that quad down, which is absolutely one of the greatest sequences of airtime I've ever felt. I've only ever ridden this coaster after the changes had been made, but I could only imagine how ridiculous the quad down felt back when it opened. I would say these modifications were worth it since the coaster's reliability has been improved substantially, but unfortunately, rather than an ultra elite coaster, these days you'll just be getting a really good one. Number 6, Iron Rattler at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. As you saw, I ranked New Texas Giant at the very bottom of the list, but it's excusable since it was also the original, while Iron Rattler was only the second RMC ever built, and I can't believe they got it this much better on their second go. Iron Rattler is one of the more unique RMCs because of how it interacts with its quarry wall environment. You've got my favorite drop on any RMC falling right alongside the wall, airtime hills going over it, inversions climbing it, and even a tunnel through the inside of it. It is one of the shorter RMC hybrid coasters at 3,200 feet long, but it's still quite a bit longer than Twisted Cyclone, Storm Chaser, and even Outlaw Run. I'm willing to excuse the length of a short RMC if it packs in something truly special, and Iron Rattler is one of those rides. Another advantage this coaster has is it uses trains manufactured by Gerstlauer because for RMC's first 2 projects they hadn't been manufacturing trains yet. While I don't mind RMC's train design, I think the Gerstlauer ones are definitely better, and Iron Rattler is the only time we've seen an elite RMC layout combined with the original trains. This is an absolutely incredible ride and what many will argue is the best roller coaster in the state of Texas. Number 5, Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion. I first rode this coaster in 2018, and at the time I had similar thoughts that I do now with Storm Chaser. I found it to be a great ride, but definitely not very unique compared to other RMCs out there. But then I came back in 2021, and while I still stand by it being a rather unoriginal RMC, it has some of the best pacing amongst them all. Twisted Timbers feels like a bucking bronco with every airtime hill destroying your thighs and every transition coming faster than you can even anticipate. The POV video you're seeing now is from when the ride first opened in 2018. That's the Twisted Timbers I experienced back then. In 2021, it felt like it was going twice as fast. It has a satisfying ride duration and amazing airtime. The only slight drawback is that none of the 3 inversions, including the barrel roll down drop, really do a whole lot for me. It seems I've just gotten numb to RMC inversions, so I don't give Twisted Timbers a hard time for that in particular. But it is the reason it doesn't climb a spot higher on this list, as we'll discuss in a second. Number 4, Untamed at Wallaby Holland. Europe's first RMC hybrid hybrid coaster also ended up being my favorite outside of the hyper-sized ones that all take up the top 3. Untamed has been given a nickname of Mini Steel Vengeance, which I think is really quite appropriate. It has more airtime moments than you could possibly imagine, ranging from sustained bits to quick pops. It does that thing we talked about earlier where it goes within the ride structure in the latter half of the ride. And Untamed also has 5 inversions, which is more than any other RMC, and they are all really good. The double inverting stall after the drop wasn't a favorite of mine originally, but it grew on me as the ride warmed up. You were pretty much out of your seat for the entire element. I also love the slow motion Heartland roll at the end that reminds me exactly of what Medusa Steel Coaster has at the end of its layout. I also can't emphasize enough how incredible this ride's airtime is and how varied it feels as well. Untamed only stands 120 feet tall, making it one of the quote-unquote small hybrid coasters, but it maintains its speed outrageously well. I know Europe doesn't have as many RMCs as people wish they did, but the 3 they've got are amazing, with this ride, another coaster which we'll talk about later, and Wildfire in Sweden, which I haven't ridden yet, but I know I'd love that one. Number 3, Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens, Tampa. The first of 3 hyper-hybrid coasters on this list is a beast of a ride. Iron Gwazi was supposed to open in 2020, but due to the pandemic, it wasn't until 2022 when we finally got to ride it. Many doubted if it would actually be worth the wait, but I think Iron Gwazi proved that any amount of time would have been worth waiting for it. At 206 feet tall and 76 miles per hour, it's both the tallest and fastest hybrid coaster in the world, with the steepest drop at 91 degrees. Even more impressive than its stats are Iron Gwazi's ridiculous pacing. It might be the most intense RMC built so far, because at no point can you truly catch your breath on this ride. Some of my favorite moments are the death roll, which is that downward inversion under the drop, and that is my favorite inversion on any RMC. I also love the wave turn over the station, which produces some absurd sideways ejector airtime. The only thing keeping it from a higher spot is the fact that its second half feels a bit sloppy and less memorable than the top 2 rides on this list. The second half reminds me a lot of Joker at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom's layout, just much more fast-paced. It's still really fun, but that first half is truly outstanding and grants Iron Gwazi a top 3 spot on this list. Number 2, Zadra at Energylandia. Europe's second hybrid coaster, opening just a few months after Untamed, is different in that they built it from the ground up instead of converting an old wooden roller coaster. That makes Zadra the highest ranked ground up RMC by far, and depending on the day you ask me, it might be the best RMC period. I do think this ride is better than Iron Gwazi in almost every facet. The layout from start to end has no wasted elements and feels more fluid overall. Unlike Iron Gwazi, it also interacts a bit with the structure, and it's also the best RMC out there for laterals. All throughout the ride, there's this weird track profiling that's done in such a way where riders are experiencing side-by-side forces while getting airtime. Zadra also features the world's largest zero-G stall, which is far and away my favorite one of these I've ever ridden. And most importantly, it's got the best pacing on the planet. When your last airtime hill looks like this, you know you're in for a good ride. Lastly, where it exceeds Iron Gwazi is in its presentation and overall ambiance. I love the soundtrack of the ride that creates an intense atmosphere, as well as the fact that you can walk all around the ride, which builds anticipation before your experience. I find Zadra to be a virtually perfect roller coaster, and it's without a doubt one of my favorites I've experienced to date. But I've decided to give one other ride the top spot, and that's number 1, Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. When Cedar Point announced what they were doing for the 2018 season, coaster enthusiasts were in disbelief. Steel Vengeance would be the first hyper-hybrid coaster in the world, and would be the ride with the most airtime of any roller coaster out there. I think the reason I've come around with giving Steel Vengeance the top spot is because of its length. Zadra goes for 4,300 feet of track, Iron Gwazi has 4,000 feet of track, Steel Vengeance has a ridiculous 5,700 feet of track, which is almost an RMC Raptor's length longer than Zadra and Iron Gwazi. And it feels like it goes on forever, especially once you get to that second half and are being launched out of your seat over and over again. The second half is where Steel Vengeance really shines because it masterfully executed the ability to weave in and out of its structure. Not knowing what element comes next is amazing, and looking back at it while writing the script and getting that wave of nostalgia from my last rides, I'm finally remembering how truly unbelievable it is. For many, the drawback of Steel Vengeance is the fact that it has a mid-course brake run that may or may not slow the train down. Every time I've ridden this coaster, the mid-course hasn't given my rides any issues, but I could see how with a trimmed ride, Steel Vengeance could fall down a few spots on this list. Still, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt, especially since hating on this ride seems to have become cool in the coaster community. I can understand and respect someone who says Steel Vengeance isn't their personal favorite coaster, but if you can't deny that this is a great ride, you're clearly seeking attention. Steel Vengeance has been and always will be one of the best roller coasters in the world. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please feel free to give me a like and subscribe to Coaster Dash, as it helps us out against the YouTube algorithm. Also, leave a comment letting me know what your favorite RMC coaster is. Until next time, I'll see you all very soon. Bye guys.